The hospital smelled of fear long before it smelled of death. Long corridors, stone walls, the echo of footsteps mixed with screams that never fully stopped. Women arrived full of hope. Many left in coffins. Inside the first obstetrical clinic, childbirth was a gamble. Some days, 1 woman died. Other days, 5. No one could explain why. Doctors blamed the air. They blamed fate. They blamed women's bodies themselves. And then there was Ignaz Semmelweis. He was not famous. He was not powerful. He was not even particularly liked. A young Hungarian doctor in a rigid Viennese system, he stood out in the worst possible way. Too intense, too obsessive, too unwilling to accept the answer. This is how it has always been. While senior physicians moved confidently through the wards, Semmelweis counted. He counted deaths. He counted patterns. He counted silence. He noticed something no one wanted to see. Women treated by doctors died far more often than women treated by midwives. Not slightly more, dramatically more. The implication was unthinkable. Doctors educated men, respected men were the danger. Semmelweis began to ask questions, and with every question, he became more alone. Colleagues laughed. Superiors grew irritated. Friends advised him to stop. Medicine did not reward doubt. It punished it. When a close friend died after a simple cut during an autopsy, something broke open in Semmelweis's mind. The symptoms were the same. The fever, the swelling, the sudden collapse. It was the same death, the same one killing mothers. He reached a conclusion that sounded like madness. Doctors were carrying death on their hands, invisible, unseen, unacknowledged. Semmelweis demanded a simple change: wash hands with chlorinated lime before touching patients. The result was immediate. Deaths collapsed. The ward became quieter. Hope returned. And yet, nothing changed, because science does not move only on evidence. It moves on ego, on hierarchy, on pride. To accept Semmelweis was to accept guilt, and guilt was more terrifying than death. So they dismissed him. They called him hysterical, unprofessional, unstable. A young doctor accusing an entire system was not a savior. He was a threat. Semmelweis did not know how to soften his truth. He did not know how to negotiate reality. He only knew he was right, and that women were dying. The more he insisted, the more doors closed. The more lives he saved, the less he was believed. In the end, the hospital chose comfort over truth, and truth was sent away. Semmelweis left Vienna defeated, confused, and furious. The deaths returned. The system survived. The mothers did not. This is where his story truly begins, because being right is one thing. Surviving the world after proving it is another. And the question lingers, quietly, uncomfortably. What happens when the man who saves lives is the one society cannot tolerate? They should have called him a hero. The numbers were undeniable. Where Semmelweis's rules were followed, mothers lived. Where they were ignored, death returned. This was not coincidence. It was causality. For the first time, childbirth had an explanation, not fate, not bad air, not God's will. Semmelweis had given death a name. What he was describing would later be called childbed fever, an invisible process carried unknowingly from one body to another. He did not have the language of microbes. He did not know about bacteria, but he understood something far more dangerous to say aloud, that doctors themselves were responsible. Every washed hand saved a life. Every unwashed one risked another. In another world, this discovery would have crowned him. In this one, it isolated him completely, because Semmelweis was not just challenging a medical idea, he was accusing a profession, and professions protect themselves. The resistance hardened. Hospitals refused his methods. Colleagues mocked him publicly. Journals dismissed his findings. Not because they were wrong, but because accepting them meant accepting blood on their own hands. Semmelweis did not know how to wait. He did not know how to soften his words. As mothers continued to die, his language grew sharper, angrier, desperate. He wrote letters accusing doctors of murder. He confronted former friends. He demanded accountability from a system that had none to give. The more he was ignored, the more obsessed he became. The more obsessed he became, the more unstable he appeared. By the early 1860s, the man who had saved countless mothers was unraveling. His behavior changed. His anger became erratic. His focus narrowed until everything else disappeared. And the world, finally tired of him, found a solution. In 1865, a friend, someone he trusted, lured him into a mental asylum under false pretenses. Once inside, the doors closed. 14 days later, Ignaz Semmelweis was dead. He was 47 years old. Evidence suggests he was beaten by guards. A wound on his right hand became infected. Gangrene set in. The same kind of infection he had spent his life fighting ended his own. There were no public apologies, no institutional reckoning. The world moved on quickly, but truth has a way of returning. Only a few years after Semmelweis's death, Louis Pasteur's work would confirm what Semmelweis had seen without a microscope, that invisible organisms cause disease. Suddenly, hand-washing made sense. Suddenly, Semmelweis's methods spread. Hospitals changed. Protocols were rewritten. Lives were saved. Not because Semmelweis lived to convince the world, but because the world finally caught up to him. Today, he is remembered as the savior of mothers. But that title came too late. Semmelweis did not die misunderstood. He died knowing he was right and watching the world refuse to listen. And that leaves a final, uncomfortable question. If truth arrives only after its messenger is destroyed, what does that say about the world that claims to value it? Semmelweis did not live long enough to be forgiven. When he died, there were no apologies waiting for him. No institutions reconsidered their choices. No journals revisited their silence. His death passed quietly, like an inconvenience finally removed. But the idea he carried did not die with him. Years later, something shifted. Not because the medical world had grown more compassionate, but because proof arrived wrapped in a language it respected. Louis Pasteur showed what Semmelweis had only sensed, that invisible organisms exist, that disease travels, that hands can carry death. Suddenly, the truth became acceptable, not because it was new, but because it was no longer attached to the man who spoke it first. Hospitals changed their rules. Doctors began washing their hands. Maternal deaths declined. The world congratulated itself for its progress. No one mentioned the man who had been beaten for saying the same thing. Semmelweis became a footnote, a tragic curiosity, a cautionary tale about obsession. But obsession was never the problem. The problem was this: he asked people to accept responsibility before they were ready. Semmelweis forced medicine to look at its own reflection, and it chose to smash the mirror instead. His story exposes something uncomfortable about progress. Truth does not rise because it is right. It rises when power allows it. By the time Semmelweis was finally called the Savior of Mothers, the title meant nothing to him. He was already gone, and the world was already absolved. But perhaps his real legacy is not hand-washing, not protocols, not statistics. It is the question he leaves behind. How many truths are buried, not because they are false, but because accepting them would cost too much? And how many lives are lost while we wait for permission to be right? He failed because he was early. History often pretends that progress is gentle, that truth simply waits its turn. But Semmelweis shows us something far more disturbing. Truth does not wait, it collides. When Semmelweis demanded clean hands, he was not proposing a technique. He was demanding responsibility. and responsibility threatens every system built on habit and pride. The medical world of his time was not cruel by accident. It was cruel by design. Doctors were taught authority, not humility. Certainty, not doubt. To admit fault was to weaken the profession itself. So when Semmelweis spoke, the system did not ask, "Is he right?" It asked, "What will it cost us if he is?" That question sealed his fate. Science likes to celebrate discovery. It is far less comfortable confronting the people it destroys along the way. Semmelweis became inconvenient, not because he lacked evidence, but because his evidence pointed inward. He exposed a truth that could not be absorbed without shame, and shame is more dangerous than ignorance. Even today, his story echoes. We still celebrate ideas more easily than the humans behind them. We still reward conformity over courage. We still forgive institutions faster than we forgive individuals. Semmelweis paid the price alone, not because he was unstable, not because he was irrational, but because he demanded change without permission. His life forces a final reckoning. How many voices are silenced not for being wrong, but for being impossible to ignore? And how often do we mistake the destruction of a person for the preservation of order? It ended with silence. The world learned to wash its hands. Hospitals changed their routines. Maternal deaths declined. Progress was recorded. Charts improved. Lives were saved. And yet, something was quietly erased. The man who forced medicine to confront itself became an uncomfortable footnote, mentioned briefly, explained cautiously. Because celebrating Semmelweis too loudly would require acknowledging something far more troubling: that institutions do not always reject ideas because they are wrong. They reject them because they are disruptive. Semmelweis did not offer comfort. He offered responsibility, and responsibility demands sacrifice. Even today, science prefers heroes who fit neatly into history, calm, agreeable, validated by authority. Semmelweis was none of these. He was abrasive, unyielding, impossible to ignore, and for that, he was removed. His legacy forces us to ask a question that remains unresolved. Is progress measured by what we discover, or by how many people we are willing to destroy along the way? Because every system remembers its successes, but few remember the voices it silenced to achieve them. Semmelweis is not just a story about medicine, he is a warning. That truth does not protect those who speak it, that being right does not guarantee survival, and that sometimes the cost of saving lives is paid by the one who tries first. He did not live to hear his name spoken with respect. He did not stand in lecture halls. He did not receive apologies. The world moved forward without him. Hands were washed. Protocols were written. Mothers survived. And slowly, quietly, history corrected itself. But correction is not the same as justice. Semmelweis was right, and that was never enough. Because truth does not protect those who carry it. It only survives them. The system that broke him did not collapse. It adapted. It absorbed his idea, stripped it of its origin, and continued as if nothing had happened. This is how progress often works, not by honoring those who speak too early, but by waiting until their absence makes acceptance easier. Semmelweis became a lesson told after the danger passed, a name attached to a practice, a story reduced to a paragraph. But behind that paragraph was a man who watched mothers die, who begged to be heard, who lost his mind trying to save lives, and who died violently inside the very system he tried to fix. If we call him the savior of mothers, we must also name the cost. He was not destroyed by ignorance. He was destroyed by certainty, by pride, by institutions unwilling to admit fault. And that raises a question that does not belong to the past. How many truths are still waiting not for evidence, but for silence? How many voices must disappear before we finally listen? Semmelweis does not ask to be remembered. He asks something far more uncomfortable: to be believed before it is safe.